This is a clone of Fuzz Sound that I'm building. As you can see, there is no enclosure. Besides that, it's mostly assembled, but it has sockets for transistors and for some capacitors. I'm going to try different transistors and see if I can make it sound any good, assuming that weird noises that I can make with electric guitar count as good. A quick summary of what it is. It's a germanium fuzz from the 60s. Park is amplifier brand, which is actually Marshall, and Fuzz Sound is actually Sola Sound Tone Bender Mark III, which is actually very similar to Buzz-Around. There's also a modern reissue made by Earthquaker, which you can still buy new today. Anyway, I never played any of these. That is not an original one of any type, so I'm rather unbiased in my expectations. Let's have a look at the schematic. I will tell you what can I understand of it, and I'm in no way an expert. I did a quick drawing skipping power filter section, and I'm kinda dyslexic, so don't take it for granted. Mind that this is germanium PNP, so the power is backwards. Ground is connected to plus. Then we have 3 transistors. However, first 2 are Darlington pair. It would be this part, including the resistor. It means that it in a way acts as a single transistor and could possibly be replaced with one. Then this is input filter. Then this capacitor acts as high frequency filter. Increase the value to tame high frequencies more. I now have a socket here. In testing, I will likely be trying different values. I will refer to it as filter cap. This is first stage bias resistor. It needs to be adjusted according to transistors and possibly ambient temperature. I replaced it with 20K pot, followed by 2K resistor. So the adjustable range is 2 to 22K. I hope that it is going to embrace the sweet spot for most of transistor pairs. This is gain path. For tests, I will leave it at minimum resistance, that is maximum gain, as I'm not interested in less fuzz. Here's the diode. I guess it does a kind of asymmetric clipping. Anyway, it seems that it has to be germanium. I used OC75+, which is Germany type, I believe. Measured forward voltage was about 0.6 volt. This is tone pot. It sets balance between outputs from these 2 capacitors. Bright sound here and dark sound here. I like it bright in general. However, I used 3 nano cap here instead of 2.2. I also changed these 18K resistors to 10K. I will refer to this as brightness. I also added a switched capacitor between here and here. I will call this fat switch. I will demonstrate the effect later. I'll be trying 20 nano and 68 nano caps here. Then here's volume pot. The output is originally very low. I assume it is supposed to match output level of the guitar, so it wouldn't get louder when bypassed. I'm not a guitar guy. I don't have an amp and I only use digital workstation. Anyway, I removed this 220K resistor, which helped a lot. Then the capacitor here is 6.4 microfarad. The closest you can easily buy nowadays is 6.8, which I used. And it doesn't seem to matter much. In Buzz-Around it's 4.7, and I think there were variants where 10 was used. Here's what I built so far. This is bias pot, which I will be using a lot. Volume and gain pots here, which will be set to maximum. Then there is brightness pot, that will be mostly set to full. Here are transistor sockets. This is filter cap socket, and here's fat switch capacitor socket. Diode is here. Here's ceramic and electrolytic capacitor pair for power filter. Input cap, in-between stages cap, and dark output cap. These are polypropylene, because it's my voodoo thing, to avoid electrolytic and polyester when possible. Then this is bright output cap, and it's a Styroflex. And this is 6.8 micro to ground, and it is polyester, because at this value polypropylene is kind of bigger than the whole board. As there is no enclosure, I will be using this testing terminal to connect power and signal. Terminal output goes to Focusrite ISA1, which acts as the I-box. From here it goes to RME Fireface card and right into digital workstation. So there are no amps, no microphones. The sound is going to be direct out. When testing, I will show transistor gain, leakage and maximum frequency. Gain is amplification ratio. For context, a random germanium transistor will typically have about 50. 100 to 120 is considered good for fast phase. Unit for leakage will be microampere. Typical germanium transistor will have leakage between 100 and 200. Anything less than that would be considered very good. More than 400 would roughly qualify the transistor as damaged or unusable or at least suspicious. It is also very dependent on temperature. More heat, more leakage. There is about 20 degrees Celsius in my room, that is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. I will measure gain and leakage with this. Note that this device will not detect leakage lower than 10 microampere, so 0 just means less than 10. Then maximum frequency, or transition frequency, indicates transistor speed. That is roughly highest frequency the transistor can handle. For this, I will quote data charts I could find. The number may be somewhat inaccurate, but it doesn't matter. Germanium transistors are in general much slower than silicon, and there are different speed grades. So-called audio frequency transistors would be rated 1 MHz or less. High-frequency transistors can be about 100 MHz. Point is to see if it matters whether it's a high-frequency or a low-grade model. And this is my monitor setup. The guitar is plugged in directly now. Here's the big oscilloscope. It will show waveform snapshots. There's another oscilloscope here with zoomed out waveform. It is useful to see when waveform gets asymmetric. Then there are two spectrum analyzers. First one is linear. The other is logarithmic with reduced frequency range, that is closer to hearing range. The guitar I will be using is Yamaha RGX A2, set to bridge humbucker. There were unmarked STC transistors used in the original Fuzz. STC stands for Standard Telephones and Cables and was a British company, and I don't have any transistors made by STC. I will start with OC75, black glass, which I think were used in some variants of Tone Bender. Here's the set. Filter capacitor is out, disconnected. So, this is a lot of noise and hum. Let's see if it works besides making random noise. And oh, it does. Now I need to figure out how to get rid of the noise. Granted, there is no enclosure, but this doesn't sound like something shielding would resolve. Let's put the filter capacitor in. That's 220p silver mica. So that helped a bit, but you can still hear the muffled hum. I wonder if it was the purpose of this capacitor in the circuit. Maybe the noise is the effect of a faulty transistor. Let's swap Q3 for something else. Here's an OC72. It has almost identical gain, but much smaller leakage. I will also pull the filter cap out. Dead quiet. Let's see if it works at all. Great, so I have the first working set. Now I would like to figure out whether the noise issue is correlated with leakage or something else in the transistor. Let's assume it's leakage. Then if I put the previous transistor back in but somehow manage to reduce leakage, I should be able to reduce the noise. I remember reading a story that back in the day, players would put their fuzz faces in the freezer to make them sound better. It may sound crazy, but since leakage is temperature dependent, maybe not so. And that is exactly what I'm going to do, except that I'm going to freeze just last transistor and not the whole thing. Let's measure its surface temperature before freezing. And put it in a bag, so it wouldn't mingle with my vegetables. So the noise is gone. And it's back already. It's getting warm really fast. Let's see what is going to happen if I warm it up even more. Looks like it is indeed about leakage. So I assume that, at least in my build, transistor 3 should have low leakage. Now I would like to know how and if gain and speed matter. And then I would like to check on transistors 1 and 2. But since with OC72 at position 3 it works fine and I do like the sound, I will take a break and do a sound check. And explore controllers, that is bias and tone control. I will put OC72 back as Q3. To add a little twist, I will also move OC75 that was giving us raised noise floor from Q3 to Q1. So now we have a bit more gain and more leakage at Q1. Let's start with bias. It replaces 10K resistor between power and first stage. That is transistors 1 and 2. Let's check how it sounds with bias at minimum. That is 2K. And now at maximum, that is 22K. As you could hear, at minimum the sound was grainy and there was noticeable noise. Then at maximum it was gated and lacked saturation. My approach is to set bias at maximum, play a note and turn it down, trying to find point of maximum saturation, or a point where it sounds interesting, depending on my mood. I will need to adjust it for every transistor set, and possibly also if there is significant room temperature change. Interestingly, it includes changing transistor free. It has its own power resistor, which was 20K in the schematic, and which I changed to 10K. I would expect that it would require its own bias regulation, but here the resistor value only seems to affect output level of the whole fuzz. I checked it with different transistor sets, and it wouldn't have any effect on noise level or saturation, at least to my ear. Let's look at tone control now. This is fully bright. And this is full dark. It's like the sound from under a heavy carpet. The waveform morphed from a spike to square. It has more bass, but less saturation. What is inconvenient is that there is large volume difference between bright and dark. Let's hear it in middle position. So every sound has a use, but I really like the bright side of this fuzz. Then I would like to add a bit more bass to it, while keeping the high saturation and crispiness, which is what I was trying to achieve by adding the fat switch. Let's check how it works. First full bright with fat switch off, then fat switch on with 20N capacitor in the socket. It kinda works, however the output waveform gets a bit asymmetric. I will expand the other oscilloscope so it will be more visible. Now the same as before, but this time I will use 68N for the add-on capacitor. I think it's a nice option to have, and I can live with misaligned output. In final build I would at least keep 20N version, or maybe both, on a 3-position switch. I will now do a sound check. I will play some simple beats, my style, and see how the fuzz reacts. I may later repeat that if another transistor set will sound different enough. It is one of the most savage fuzzes I ever played. I love it already. But let's get back to Q3. A germanium transistor like this OC72, that is low speed, high gain and low leakage, is a rare find. High gain and low leakage combination is in my experience much more common with high speed models. But before we go there, let's check low gain options. Here's a Soviet MP41. So this doesn't sound very different from previous set. You could say it's nearly identical. although it feels a bit different, like the previous one had more grit and less detail, if it makes sense. But that may as well be the matter of different biasing, as I had to adjust bias to get to the point of maximum saturation. So, by the way, assume that every time I swap transistors, I'm also adjusting bias. Anyway, the difference is very subtle. If you would put it through an amp, which would add its own distortion, it would vanish completely. Let's try something medium speed. Here's an RCA2N410. It has low gain and leakage below threshold of detection. Maybe I got carried away a bit. I'm not sure why exactly, but this is my favorite set so far. And the noise floor is amazingly low. Let's move to high speed. This is AF114. It's worth to note that it is different technology than OC75 or OC72. OC70 series, AC128 and pretty much every germanium transistor used in fuzz boxes from the 60s would be alloy junction, while this one is alloy diffused junction, so there is a kind of technology upgrade. And these, apart from higher speed, tend to have much lower leakage, at least within my sample base. Sounds good. It feels somewhere in between OC72 and N410. Now I would like to check a high-speed transistor with high leakage. I'm not going to play it much, just want to check the noise situation. Here's another AF114. The leakage in this one is not really bad, but it's the worst one I could find. Well, there it is. Actually, if I turn the bias all the way up, it falls to acceptable levels. But the sound turns to the bee in the tin can type. So it's not really usable, unless you are a fan of the art roots. And what about silicon transistors, which have no leakage? Here's to N2906. I picked it because it has low gain for a silicon, which is similar to higher gain germanium transistors I tried before. There's no noise, but the sound is grainy and the release stage is odd. It fades to a point and then cuts off suddenly. Let's see. And this is the best bias point I could find. It was quite hard to dial, and in different bias positions it would be much worse. To sum up requirements for Q3 in my build: germanium, low leakage, any gain, depending on taste. Now let's have a look at Q1 and Q2. OC75 pair I've been using so far is low speed, medium gain with rather highish leakage. I will try an average pair. I mean average leakage, lowish gain, low speed. These are AC128. I'm also putting back N410 as Q3. That feels fairly similar to OC75 set. Now I want to check a really low gain, low leakage pair to see if it matters much. These are Soviet MP21s, closest I could find for low speed transistors. First off, ignore this peak. This is some kind of broadcast being picked by the wiring. It comes and goes. If I switch the power of the circuit, I will still get this. With this pair I kind of ran out of bias range. So bias is all the way up to 22K, and I still didn't get to gated bass area. I don't want to change the bias resistor now, so let's assume it's close enough to the sweet spot. So it sounds more tamed, and is definitely usable, especially if you like softer fuzz. Now let's make it low gain with high leakage. Here's a pair of AC128s with quite bad gain to leakage ratio. This sounds similar to previous set. It's fine, even if a bit softer. And the bias sweet spot is in the middle, just like with OC75 set. It seems like bias target value is correlated with leakage and saturation level with gain. Let's try a high gain, high leakage set. That's Sanyo 2SB22. With such leakage you would assume it belongs in a trash can. But let's see how will it work. Actually, I think it sounds great. It seems that this circuit is very forgiving when it comes to leakage of the first two transistors. And I feel like I want a lot of gain in the first stage. Now let's see if it is as forgiving when it comes to high-speed transistors. I will use AF114 again. I think these are the same I used before. Readings are a bit different, and I guess it's hotter today. And yes, it takes a couple of days to shoot this. So something new is happening. We get that crispy sparkling top end that sounds kind of like a welding machine. And that you can clearly see on waveforms. It's interesting, but maybe too extreme. And there's also raised noise floor. Let's see what happens if I put the filter cap in. I will use 220p. So, as expected, that clears it out. Now, what if I use a smaller filter cap? Let's try 22p. I like this. The welder sound is still there, just a bit tamed. This would be a good base to add a proper filter, like a resonant low pass. I mean something like this. That was Moogerfooger filter. But let's go back to raw sound. I would like to check what would it sound like if I paired high-speed and low-speed transistors. Let's get the OC75 I used before. So now I will keep AF114 as Q1 and add OC75 as Q2. And I'm pulling filter cap out. So that's no different than two AF114s. Let's see what happens if I swap Q1 and Q2. It seems that transistor speed only matters for Q1. Now I would like to check a pair of medium speed transistors. See if I'm going to get that welding sparkles sound. Here we have two Polish ASY37s, made by Teva, high gain, medium leakage. I like this. It's like oversaturated welding machine. I could probably do it for days, but let's just do one more test. Can I replace Darlington pair with single transistor? I assume I need high gain, high leakage one, so I will look into my trash box. Here's a bag of AC126, king of leakage. I just need to connect collector and base to first socket and emitter to second socket. Well, after all, it turns out that you don't need 3 transistors for this fuzz. Just a really bad one and a really good one. I think I will need a switch for Q1 and Q2, because I want at least 2 options, ASY37s and one of low speed pairs, OC75 or AC128. Haven't decided just yet. If I use a rotary switch, I can have 3 or more options, in which case I will likely add the single AC126, even if just because it's not good for anything else. Time to drill the enclosure, but this video ends here. Then I will need to find a silly name for this fuzz. Tone welder seems appropriate. Or maybe spark sound fuzz. We'll see. Remember not to subscribe and be careful not to hit anything.